Porn addiction. You might not think of it as the best teacher in your life, but I'm here to tell you it very much can be, if you listen, of course. Welcome back to another episode of the podcast, Dr. Trish Leigh. Here I am. I'm your hostess with the mostest. So today, what we're going to do is break down porn addiction, its impact on sexual arousal, and a journey that I have undergone personally as a neuroscientist, a neurofeedback provider, a brain health coach, and eventually a sex addiction recovery coach. So I'm going to give you a little insight into my own journey of why I care about porn. Let's dive in. So now quite a few years back, when I was a neurofeedback provider at my private practice here in the town that I live in, I was working with a client and a friend. So this client was not proceeding as well as I would have liked in neurofeedback brain training. The reason that I knew that is because neurofeedback comes with measurable data. Most people that I work with, their brains will train and move in the direction of optimizing so that a person can feel better. And at that point, I was mostly working with people who struggled with anxiety and ADHD. So my goal was to help people improve their focus, reduce their stress and depression. And this client, Sam, who I write about in my new upcoming book, Mind Over Explicit Matter, Sam was not proceeding. But, nice guy. Of course, I have intake paperwork where I ask people all the things that are going on with them. At that point, I did not ask about porn use because honestly, I didn't care about it at all. But of course, now I do ask about porn use on my intake form for neurofeedback. But what happened was, Sam wasn't moving forward, but I was going through all the motions of trying to figure out what I can do to help him, and he started making a little bit of incremental progress until one fateful day when I walk into the office to greet Sam, and there he is. His head's hanging low. He's riddled with shame, and I can see it all over him, and he looks up and he doesn't want to tell me, but he does want to tell me all at the same time. He blurts it out. I watch porn. And I'm like, okay, so you watch porn. What does this have to do with me or neurofeedback, or why are you sharing it with me? Well, it was the reality that his wife was making him share it with me, or she was leaving because she had found him watching porn multiple times. He had promised he had stopped. He hadn't. So you could read the longer story throughout the book, but long story short is that on that day, Sam told me about porn. And like I told you, I wasn't working with porn at all. He left. I referred him to a colleague who was a certified sex addiction therapist. Out he goes. We still were doing neurofeedback together, but out he goes to approach porn recovery with another professional. But of course, you've met me, right? This is now in my brain, and I cannot let this thing go. Porn and his brain performance. How do the two connect? So of course I dive in, and immediately I realize that it's the dopamine pathways in the brain have been hijacked by this high level supernormal stimulus of porn. At that point, I did not know that porn is a supernormal stimulus, which means it's a behavior that can give your brain excessively high amounts of dopamine, more than can be found in any real world, real life pleasurable experience. So of course I knew about addiction and how the brain's pathways can be hijacked by substances. And honestly, I definitely knew about the brain being hijacked by gambling, by shopping, those types of behavioral addictions, but I never applied it to porn. But I dive in, and I am all in. I need to figure this out. Plus I have the sense, because I'm still talking to Sam, there's no way he's going to recover from this thing with the help that he was getting. It was costing him $300 a session. And there's value in that if you're moving forward, for sure. But it was very expensive and he was not moving forward. Tens of thousands of dollars he and his family were spending. And I could see, especially in his brain performance, he was not optimizing his brain. It was staying almost the same. So a couple years later, I'm still working with him on and off. He comes back. And I didn't realize throughout that time, he had been struggling and suffering and trying to quit porn by himself. He didn't realize during that time, I had doubled down on massive amounts of training with the leading sex addiction professionals in the country. I had become certified as a sex addiction recovery coach on top of being a neurofeedback provider and a brain health coach. So I already knew most of this. And plus I have a variety of different, college degrees. So anyway, dopamine reward pathways are completely hijacked by porn. Sam comes back. I'm completely prepared. Not only does he need neurofeedback, I now understand that porn affects neurological regulation at the core. The brain becomes disrupted and there's brain dysfunction that results. I knew all about it. And now I knew that the protocols I had been using in the past for focus and stress weren't the ones that he needed. I changed his training. Secondarily, I now know that this is a comprehensive deep end problem, not a shallow end problem like some people think. What that means is it needs a neurobiopsychosocial approach. It needs a whole person approach, but it starts with the neuro. So we have to regulate the brain dysfunction at the core, but then we do have to address what's happening in the mind. That's the psycho. What's happening in the body. That's the bio. And what's happening in the environment and relationships. That's the social. Neurobiopsychosocial approach. I now knew at that point it has to be a whole person approach. And in a fleeting moment of inspiration and, I don't want to sound too hyperbolic, but in a moment of, I figured out how all of my education snapped together to help him. I sat down and I generated a 28-page outline. I literally felt like it was moving through me, which was one of the most awesome experiences in my life. And honestly, I had felt like I had renewed purpose in a way that I had never, ever, ever known. And honestly, what I experienced in that moment in the 28-page outline is what I want for you. I want everybody to put the stuff in their life behind so that they can have the moment where their purpose moves through them and they are 100% positive this is what they want to do to have their impact on planet Earth. That's how I felt. Hyperbole, here she comes, right? So anyway, in that moment, I put together the outline of what now is my program, Porn Free Brain Forever. It's a neurobiopsychosocial approach. It's what is needed. So I put it down in an outline and I immediately start doing it with Sam. And guess what? It works. It takes 90 days and Sam is a different person. Start regulating his brain. I see it changing on the graphs and the charts that I have for neurofeedback. We start implementing the pivot plan that's so important to be able to, get over urges and cravings. So what happens in the neuroscience of addiction is this neurological dysregulation at the core then creates emotional dysregulation. You feel more stressed. You feel more overwhelmed. You feel more fatigued, and it's much more difficult to get through your life. That's why you want the dopamine. But when you get the dopamine, the neurotransmitter of more motivation and pleasure, it motivates you back for more pleasure from the source, porn and masturbation, which gets you locked into that relationship and you keep going back. On the other hand, over back in your life, you're in a dopamine deficit state. All the things that would have provided dopamine for you now don't. So your work stinks, and that was the case for Sam. He was on the verge of being fired for not producing. His relationship was crumbling. His wife was about to leave. His children knew something was up because he was sometimes up. He was manic. He was sometimes up and full of energy. The other times he was like a drill sergeant, up and down, back and forth. They never knew what they were going to get. His social life was plummeting. He was more and more in isolation. And he began to know he had a problem. He had urges and cravings for porn. Back to the neuroscience, what happens is when your brain is more regulated, you don't have as many urges. And now if you do have a craving, you can look at it for what it is, a call for emotional regulation to de-stress or offset boredom. This is what Sam did. He didn't have as many. Now he could look at the ones he had and figure out what they meant for him, which means he could change his mind and the way he used his body. He also struggled with sexual arousal dysfunction, which he couldn't put his thumb on because it didn't fall into the category of ED, which was all he really knew. People have ED or they don't. He could sometimes have a sexual experience with his wife, sometimes not. He sometimes could initiate it, but couldn't keep going. It was stressful for him, and that stress in his brain made it so that the sexual arousal dysfunction kept perpetuating. This is all part of the neuroscience behind porn addiction and compulsive masturbation. So for me, what happened is I knew how to help him, and I did. Porn Free Brain Forever is 94 lessons, and it's because 90 days later, Sam was basically recovered. And I get the question all the time, once an addict, always an addict? And the answer is twofold, of course. I wish it was onefold, but it's twofold. The answer is recovery is a process. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So at the end, you should be recovered. And actually what recovery means is that you recover your true self, the real you, the real one in there. The one that has an experience where 28 pages of an outline of purpose come out of them. That's who you're recovering. And then you're going to have the courage to be that version of yourself for the rest of your life. That's what you're recovering. Beginning, middle, and end recovery. But the twofold aspect is it necessitates the building of a foundation of a lifestyle that no longer includes porn and no longer needs it. When you regulate your brain using neurofeedback, what happens is then you have the ability to set this foundation. You no longer need high levels of dopamine, and you learn to reset the pleasure pathways back into your life. Sam had difficulty doing that. It is very difficult when your brain is used to going to porn and masturbation for high levels of dopamine. Basically, what it does is it shifts your brain, the electrical energy use, into excessive amounts of medium neutral speed. What that means is you have low motivation back into your life. You might feel depressed. The dopamine's not there anymore. It's just in the screen. So when I say go get on purpose and you're going, listen, lady, I wish I could, that's because of the dopamine deficit in your life and the dopamine dependency in the screen. So you don't understand yet that if you regulate your brain, that shifts along the way. You shift from dependency to not needing dopamine from porn or masturbation anymore. That's what happened for Sam. But then I had to help him figure out how he's going to get healthy levels of dopamine from healthy sources. That's the psycho, that's the bio, and that's the social aspect. What is necessary in recovery? Okay, so let's talk about the road to recovery. It's not linear. It's a process, not an event. So what have I learned about porn addiction from this journey with Sam is to have patience in the process, but you have to have pragmatic optimism. And what that means is you're optimistic and you're hopeful. There's a paper from the Mayo Clinic that shows that the placebo effect, thinking the treatment that you're doing will work, is incredibly powerful for higher success rates. There's even been studies where they do sham knee surgery. So half of the people get an actual knee surgery and their knee heals. The other half of the people get a sham knee surgery and their knee heals. Isn't that awesome? The sham surgery is just little incisions in the skin, no knee surgery. But they thought that that surgery would help them, and it actually worked. That's the placebo effect, which a lot of people who don't understand it criticize the placebo effect. They'll go, well, isn't that just placebo? And I'm like, no, it's not just placebo, but placebo is important. We need to use it because it's proven to help increase success rates. Totally awesome. Am I right? The opposite is what's called the nocebo effect. Now, nocebo means you're doing a thing and you don't think it's going to work. So when people implement a therapeutic strategy, and these are the people who are forced to, but I've got to be honest. I have people who I've worked with, their wives have forced them to work with me. They did not think it was going to work, and it worked anyways, because neurofeedback's really powerful at a biological and a neurophysiological level. But back to nocebo effect. The idea is that you don't think it's going to work, so it doesn't. And I'm sure it's attitudinal. I'm sure you've had an attitude before where you're like, this stinks, and the thing did stink. And if you have an attitude that this is awesome, the thing is awesome. Placebo, nocebo. Nocebo is also related to something that's called learned hopelessness. There's a whole body of literature that when people have struggled for so long with a thing that they couldn't figure out how to solve, they begin to feel hopeless. They learn that there's no hope. And this learned hopelessness makes it so they stay stuck in this downward spiral. That's why I want to give you pragmatic hope. And I want you to know there's science behind it, that when something does work and you believe it's going to work, like neurofeedback, like the neurobiological, psychological, social approach that I am sharing with you, when you know it works and you do it, that's the pragmatic piece. You're doing what you need to, and you're hopeful, you're believing that it's going to work. It's proven that it will work more, and especially when there's efficacy behind all the pieces of the treatment too. Everything I do has very high levels of scientific efficacy by themselves. And then you add all the pieces together, boom, synergy, coalescence. That's what I'm talking about here. So going back to, we're not tapping into learned hopelessness. We are tapping into pragmatic hope. You do what you need to. You know it's going to work, but you have to have patience. It's a journey, not an event. And I learned this with Sam because when I started to help him, 90 days actually isn't that long, but I had been studying it and I had been working with him for, I think it was 3 years between when he first came to when he came back. I know his wife, I know his family. My heart was aching while I was getting fully trained and wrapping my mind around this thing completely. It was a long time of not helping him. And I'm sure you can relate if you've tried to quit porn and masturbation by yourself. It's been a long time of suffering, struggling, trying, but not getting there. And then boom, when you have the resources that you need and you have the strategies that are proven by science, the techniques, you have advanced technology like neurofeedback, you have the support of coaches and a team, you can do it. And it can take 94 days of lessons that you're implementing, action steps that you're taking, using neurofeedback to regulate your brain, allowing you to do all the things that you need to do. But a big lesson I've learned from this journey is it requires patience. That's a road to recovery, not an elevator to recovery. So let me break down just a couple of the really strong lessons that I've learned, and then we can move on to what you can do today. So I've learned that you need patience, and it's a process, not an event. I've also learned that porn has nothing to do with sex, believe it or not. It has everything to do with dopamine and dopamine dependency. It has everything to do with a brain that was hijacked when you were a kid. An underdeveloped brain should not be exposed to porn. That's why I'm on a mission, because the next generation, young people, kids, but also, if you're 18 or 20, this generation is having their brains significantly damaged, not only by screen excess, but specifically by explicit matter and pornography. Their brains are completely hijacked. Those reward centers are being desensitized. And the next generation is going to really struggle to have relationships, really struggle to be productive citizens on purpose, and really struggle to perform and have sexual satisfaction. This is a recipe for disaster. That's why this girl is on a mission. When I found out about this with Sam, I literally sat in the blue chairs that are currently sitting behind me, and I sat there like, am I in on this thing? Am I gonna go tell the world that they shouldn't watch porn? Because I knew I would be criticized, and I'm used to getting praise. I knew I would probably have disinformation campaigns on me, which I do. I knew it was probably going to cause me some problems and, maybe personally not benefit me so much. I had to tell my children, I have 5 children and a bonus son. I had to go, kids, guess what mom's into now? Porn addiction. I look at the desktop on my computer in my drive. The first folder on my drive is labeled Passion Project. And I actually hired my son's girlfriend to help me with it. And we just talked about it as the Passion Project before I told anybody. Awesome, right? But I sat in these chairs and I'm like, yep, I'm doing it. The world needs it, because if I'm going to have an impact here, this is it. This is the calling. The divine intervention has moved through me to help one person, and I did it really quickly. Am I going to stop there? Hell no. I'm going to take this thing out for full spin, which is why I'm here. So I want you to know that, we talked about patience, but at the same time, this isn't about sex. This is about dopamine. And what I want for you is for you to get healthy amounts of dopamine from your real life. It's not about sex at all, which leads me to the next lesson, forgiveness. Because Sam's wife was going to leave him. She was out, because she's like, if he's going to be so into other women, I don't even want any part of it. It's not even the women. It's the dopamine hits that the women represent. It's not about the scenes or the scenarios or the acts or the implements. It's about the dopamine that they are linked to. So when partners have this understanding, there can be forgiveness on a new level. When you have this understanding, you can forgive yourself. And what that helps to do is dissipate the shame. And shame's the next lesson that I learned from this journey, is that there is a lot of shame. That's what kept me or made me sit in these chairs and wonder if I was going to talk about it. I felt shame. And I know Sam felt shame and guilt. But guilt is powerful. Shame is the lowest energy emotion. Guilt is the second lowest. And if you shift shame into guilt, shame is I'm a bad person for what I'm doing. Guilt is I don't like that thing I'm doing. So that's very different. One is personified, one is the behavior. This is a behavior that occurs because of dopamine dependency. This isn't you. This isn't even about you at all. You are the real you. Your true self in there. I call my true self Little Wish. That's what my dad called me when I was young, and I loved it. I still can see this picture of us walking behind our pool. Yes, our above ground pool. My parents owned a pool store, and he used to call me Little Wish, and it would irritate my sister Amy so much. Amy, if you're listening, because I would sign all my cards until I was about 25. Happy Father's Day, Dad. Love, Little Wish, because I was so proud of that. But Little Wish is what I resonated as the best version of myself. And the coolest thing is I get to be her all the time now. I get to be her all the time now. That is what I want for you. No shame. Change that shame into guilt. Let that guilt move you into new thoughts, new actions, new social relationships, new sexual relationship with your partner, or attracting a partner to you. If you have no partner, porn prevents you from getting that partner. I know you may not understand. If you have a partner and she's moving away from you, she's distancing herself because she doesn't feel connected anymore, I know you do understand. It's because your brain gets linked to porn for satisfaction and pleasure, which means it gets unlinked from your partner. And we know this. This isn't my thought. This is scientifically proven. We know if you're linked to porn, then you can't link yourself to somebody else readily. It very much impacts you, which leads me to my next lesson, non-judgment. Because we can judge people for their behaviors. We can judge people for what they're into. We can judge people for their seeming mistakes. I would love to contend to you that these are driven by dopamine when it comes to porn, when it comes to fetishes, when it comes to even affairs, even paying for sex. What porn does is it creates an aura of hypersexuality, which some people mistake for their libido. Hypersexuality is you're looking for sex everywhere. And once you've kind of maxed out on sex from the screen, your brain, that hijacker in your brain, he'll tell you, let's go get it from the real world. He goes, I have a brilliant idea. Let's go have a hookup. I've got an idea. Let's do some webcam sex. I've got an idea. Let's go to a massage parlor. Those are all hijacker ideas, and they are terrible for you. They all indicate significant amounts of brain dysregulation and dysfunction. All indicate you are stuck in dopamine seeking mode. So, non-judgment. These behaviors, they don't require judgment against you. What they require is neurological regulation at the core in your brain. You won't be doing those behaviors when your brain is regulated, when it's optimized. When your brain's energy is flowing in the way that it's supposed to, it won't be in the wired and tired brain pattern I call strained brain. That strained brain makes you want to self-soothe and self-stimulate simultaneously. If you consume porn long enough, you tip into what I call drained brain. Drained brain gives you sexual arousal dysfunctions, it gives you ED, and it really keeps you locked into dopamine dependency. You have to keep going back for more, multiple times a day even. Many people I work with, they can only go a couple hours with checking porn, get that little dopamine hit to keep going. Wired and tired, strained brain, drain brain, totally need dopamine to get through your day. If that's you, it's not about the behaviors, it's about the brain dysfunction. Then there's something you can do about it. Neurofeedback. What neurofeedback does, it regulates your brain. It's completely all natural. So if you're looking for an all natural solution to porn addiction and to erectile dysfunction, neurofeedback is a modality you want to try. And I know from the people I work with, it's the last thing they try ever because they recover, beginning, middle, end. What neurofeedback does is once we measure how your brain is performing on a QEEG brain map, we see the areas of dysfunction and the levels of dysfunction. And then I know exactly what to do. I set the protocols. You do sessions daily. They're workouts for your brain. You use wearable tech with my proprietary app, Dr. Trish Leigh. It's in the App Store. You check that out. When you're using that app, which you do need to get access working with me and my team, you can check it out, but you can't use it. So when you go in there, if you're a client, we set it and it regulates your brain back to those optimized levels. You get charts and graphs showing you what's happening. At the same time, you work the program, Porn Free Brain Forever. You work my new program, Pleasure Pathway Reset. And what you're doing is neurobiopsychosocial. We're covering everything. It's all covered. We're starting with the neuro. You regulate your brain. You're using everything else. So here's what I want you to know. There is a solution. I want you to know that you can use other lifestyle changes, changing your habits, including meditation. Meditation's a lower level neuromodulation technique where you sit with your own brain waves and you try to regulate them yourself. That's not using technology. Neurofeedback does a similar type of thing with technology that's guiding your brain into a better mode. So there's 2 levels of neuromodulation. Meditation, you can do it at home. 3, 13, 23 minutes. Deeper levels of brain regulation, 3 minutes. There's science that shows 3-minute breathing techniques can settle your brain a bit. 13 minutes can settle it and regulate it even more. 23 can get you a deeper level of regulation. They can be really tricky for people who are struggling with porn addiction. The science that shows that is for people with fairly regulated brains, but it's worth a shot at home. Exercise. We know that exercise gives you dopamine. We know that joining a support group or using an app, getting coaching. We offer personal coaching in my company and my program for people who want a coach to move them through a process. Replacing the habit with a healthier dopamine producing source. Dopamine stacking with real world experiences, which I've talked about in other videos. Not necessarily dopamine detoxing up front, but of course you want to do that eventually. There's things you can do at home, but if you're stuck in this loop, you need neurofeedback. We look at your brain, we know what's going on, then we regulate it, and then you ride off into the sunset. Okay, so final thoughts are, this situation isn't about sex, it isn't about you, it's about dopamine dependency and neurological regulation. I learned acutely about this in my own life, helping my client and my friend. It was wreaking havoc on his life. And in the book that's coming out, Mind Over Explicit Matter, in that book, I talk about him years later after this whole journey, showing up in his black Mercedes Maybach, black on black on black, just the way I would get that car. That is such an awesome car. Pulls up in his blacked out Maybach with his beautiful wife who was going to leave him a couple years before, laughing and walking in, felt because he was in better shape than ever before, bought that Maybach because he didn't lose his job. In fact, he ended up getting a promotion because he's back on track. His brain could work again. He could think, he could function. He was motivated, back on purpose. So all of those things, money, relationships, cars, those are all ancillary benefits of what happens when you get your brain moving again. But most importantly, he had a healthy brain in his head. He had no more porn addiction and no more erectile dysfunction. That is worth its weight in gold. So implement what we've talked about here, but I want you to know what I've learned from the journey. There's no shame. Get the help you need. If it's not with me, have it be with somebody who is using a neurobiopsychosocial approach, somebody who feels good to you, and get at it, my friend, because the solution is so much closer than you know. All right, I'm signing off for now, but as always, control your brain or it'll control you. I'll see you next time.